Hi everyone, my name is Dickson and I want to welcome you back to our continued study on the presentation of lures. During this master class in this area of presentation, there seems to have been some confusion in a few of the things that we've already talked about. So I'm going to sort of take a sidetrack today and I'm going to sort of try to clear up some of the things that we've done because I want to make sure that you have an understanding. The entire reason we're doing these vlogs is to help people get out there on the water and catch fish. So when there is this misunderstanding, I'd like to clear it up. Before we move on to the next part of our discussion, keeping in mind we're talking about trolling and casting. We're going to be doing a lot of details on both of those subjects. But before we leave this early talk that we've already had on trolling, we talked about contour trolling, we talked about pattern trolling, and we talked about trolling deep structure. And we showed some examples from an old video that I made out on Lake Grenada because it showed it all pretty well, what I wanted you to have as far as a 101 understanding of those three different types of trolling techniques. Now, over the last couple of days, I've had some questions come in that sort of led me to believe that I've taken a little too much for granted. And I know some of my past students that have been around me for quite some time, they have a total understanding of what I was doing. But we have a lot of new people who weren't quite understanding some of the things that we've discussed just recently. So I want to try to clear that up so that everybody's on the same page before we move on to our sort of detailed, advanced discussion on trolling. Let me start with this. We talked about contour trolling, pattern trolling, and trolling deep break lines. There's a bunch of different examples of each one of those trolling techniques. But I want to clear this up. This is really important. Contour trolling is simply something we do in the shallows. And we've already defined the shallows as 8 to 10 feet of water or less. And we also established that fish react differently 8 to 10 feet and shallower than they do 8 to 10 feet and deeper. They're two different critters in those two zones. And in the shallow zone, we know a fish will take a lure off the top, or take one free running in the intermediate water, or it'll take a lure off the bottom. He'll take it any which way in the shallows. So in our contour trolling, we're straining the water to find fish, but we're also learning a lot about the lake as we do that. We could be contour trolling an area of a shoreline. All of a sudden, in order to keep a lure in a position, we have to turn way out in the middle of the lake before it turns back down. Well, we just created a bar. So contour trolling, let's set that aside and keep in mind we do that in the shallows, 8 to 10 feet or less. And now we're going to move to our next area of study the other day, which was pattern trolling. And here's where we got to make an absolute distinction for everyone, that there is this understanding. Fish act differently, 8 to 10 feet of water or deeper. In this section of water, 8 to 10 feet and deeper, fish aren't just anywhere. They won't take the bait off the top. They're not going to take it just free running out there in the middle of nowhere. When we're fishing deeper than 10 feet, two things we have to consider. One, we need to have our lure on the bottom. Now, keep in mind there's exceptions. Where could we catch some stripers or some crappie or some of the trouts that suspend vertically when our lure's not on the bottom? Yeah, we can do that. But these are the exceptions. I'm talking about the rule now. When I'm fishing deeper than 10 feet, I want my lure on the bottom. If somehow I've come across some vertically suspended fish, I go ahead and stick a lure down to them and catch them. I have nothing against that, but that happens about 1/2% of the time in my fishing. Every fish I'm catching, bottom line, I'm on the bottom. So as I'm moving deeper than 10 feet, my intermediate depths and all of my deeper depths, I'm fishing on the bottom. I'm keeping my lures on the bottom. Now you say, Why exactly do you do that? This is simple. We talked about this back early on when we began our studies. When fish move about in a lake, whether it's a seasonal movement or a daily movement, they follow bottom features. They follow these features on the bottom of the lake that are different in some respects from the surrounding bottom area. This is a given. This is a fishing fact. So if when fish are moving in deep water, and I'm now fishing deep water, I've checked my shallows, I'm fishing deep water, where would I want my lure? If the fish are on the bottom following these bottom features, I want my lure in the same place. Keep in mind the definition of depth control, or the definition of catching fish, is putting a lure by a fish where he is, where he can see your lure and eventually then take it. And if he's on the bottom, that's where I want my lure. I want my lure on the bottom. Now that's point one. And point two, and here's I think where there's been some misunderstanding. When we're fishing deep water, again I repeat, when we're fishing deep water, 8 to 10 feet or deeper, we never just fish deep water. We only fish deep structure. Now you and I were together for about a 6 or a 7, maybe even an 8-week study on all of the different types of structure. How do we identify them? How do we locate them? And then now we're talking about presentation of lures, like how do we fish them? Well, I don't think maybe, and this is one of those areas I'm kind of concerned that I took a little too much for granted. Because I talk about structure, breaks, and break lines, but we really didn't have a thorough study of breaks and break lines. We had a thorough discussion on structure, but not so much breaks and break lines. So I'm going back up. This is something that I really teach in Basic Movements of Fish, but it's important that we understand it right now when we're talking about presentation of lures. Where are we going to put our lure? How are we going to put our lure in a place where the fish can see it? This is important. Don Dickson never fishes deep water. I only fish deep structure. But how do I pinpoint my fish on these structures? People say, hey, I've identified a structure. I know how to do that. Well, but now where am I going to put my lure? When I say I'm not fishing deep water, that means I'm not just randomly fishing any and all depths. In deep water, fish are following features. So I have to have my lure on a feature. I only fish features. Well, what features am I talking about? I'm talking about breaks and break lines. Here's why. And then I'll define it for you, in case you've missed this in our study. When fish move about in a lake, they follow bottom features. And we identify these features are on something that we refer to as structure. Structure, by definition, is the bottom of a lake, different in some respects from the surrounding bottom area, but we think of it, it's the big picture, it's structure. But when fish move on this structure, keep this in mind now, fish cannot see the whole structure. I've used as an example many times already in our discussions that saddle at my summer school in the Winnipeg River. It's about 400 yards long, and it's about 150 yards wide. A fish can only, even though he sees really well, he can't see very far. So he can't see the whole picture. He can only see a little piece of it. Well, how to identify which piece is he going to be on where I can catch him? Keep in mind that fish has to see my lure in order to take it. So here's the answer now, and make sure we get this because this is extremely important. When fish move on structure, they pause and eventually stop at a break or a break line on that structure. And these are the spots where you and I run into the fish. Now let's identify a break. This dock is not a break. It's not a structure either. It's not a break I care about. It is a break. And that stump that's out in the middle of this lake somewhere, or out in the middle of your lake, is sitting out on a 10 or 15 or 20 foot flat. There's a stump. Some people call that structure. It's not structure. It's a stump. Some people refer to that as a break. Well, if that break is not on structure, to me, it doesn't exist. It's just a stump. I don't consider it a break. I consider it what it is. It's a stump out in the middle of nowhere. So of no value to us from a fishing standpoint. So breaks, whether it's a stump, a rock pile, anything unusual, a sunken boat, anything like that, that's sitting on a structure, is somehow on or connected to a structure that we've identified, then it becomes an important spot for you and I to fish, because fish can stop and they can pause and eventually stop at one of these breaks on structure. Now, the most important break we have on structure is a break line. Now, I'm going to identify this for you for a couple of different reasons, and then we'll end up our discussion today. But a break line, for those of you who are relatively new to it, is where we have an increase. Most of the time we're thinking in terms of an increase, a sudden increase in depth occurring on the bottom of the lake. And these breaks can occur at all different depths. Now, for it to be identified as a break line, it has to run for a distance and continue to be breaking, but run for a distance. For instance, if I'm fishing the edge of a channel on the big Flatland Reservoir in Texas, I'm looking for that two-sided bar that we talked about. I may have to throw a side feeder stream cut break line to that cut maybe for 300 or 400 yards out to where it meets the main river channel. And then I may have to cover 100 yards this way where it breaks into the main river channel. So I have to troll these break lines. It's the break lines that end up forming the structure. If I have a three-sided bar, like I used to demonstrate pattern trolling the other day, it's breaking off both sides and off the end. Now, I followed that break line around and threw markers, but it was so small I couldn't do that and still fish it at the same time in that fashion. I had to throw some markers, identify where that break line was, throw some markers, and then make straight line passes. Now, I think there was a misunderstanding that really came from some of the questions I had when we went to the deep water trolling. I showed my depth sonder. I established on a side feeder stream cut that we had a break line. It's breaking from about 20 into about 37 feet. But when I was running that break line, I was fine-tuning my pass and running 20. As soon as it started breaking, I turned back and, well, you saw the video. Well, a lot of people got the idea I was just fishing 20 feet. And no, I was fishing a break line. Now, I'm going to clear this up for you. I'm going to pretend for a minute that this table is an area of a lake, and where it falls off this table, where we have a definite change in depth right here. This is a break, and it runs for a distance. I'm going to say from this side of the table over there to that end of the table, it's 300 yards. So this break line runs for a few hundred yards. I got to fish it all. Fish could be anywhere along that. They could be at a stump or a rock pile or a little finger that swings out on that. I've got to fish it all. But I got to fish the break line. I can't be fishing down somewhere down in deep water, just random depth, or I can't be having my lure up over here in the middle of the table fishing on top of this flat. That's not where the fish are. Keep in mind, when fish move in deep water, they're following an exact feature. And if we want the fish to see our lure, we have to have our lure right on that spot. Now, when I was running that break line, I was doing making a pretty good pass, but where the problem came in was a lot of the viewers couldn't see the actual break. I'm going to run back and I'm going to show you just one little clip, which we shot a little bit later out on the main river channel where it was breaking. And I'm going to go across that break line this way, from shallows, from the flats, off into the deep water. I want you to see on my meter how that broke. And then I want you to back up in your mind and think about how I was following where that break line was. I was following it right along where it was breaking. But I didn't want to see it go all the way to 35 feet. Then I'd have to swing the boat way back like this. And then by the time I come back up onto the 20, before I could turn my boat the other way, my lure would be coming up over this flat at 20 feet. I have to keep it right on the edge. When you're fishing that break line, you want your lure on the break line. Once you establish where that is, You can, if you have a tiller handle boat, if you was noticed when I was talking, I was actually describing it to you. And at the same time, I was still making a perfect pass, only because I've done it so many times. I was following that brake line perfectly. But I wasn't showing enough of the deep water on the other side so guys would really get the picture of what I was doing. So I want to show you this brake line. I'm showing you a picture right now. Here's what that brake line looked like. See how it's braking? Now, I don't want to fish it at 28 or 31 or 33. I want to fish it where it was braking. In the shallower section of that brake line, it was braking at 20 feet. When I got clean out to the end, it was braking at 22 feet. You can see it plain as day. That's where I have to keep my lure. Now, I'm going back up, and then we'll close off with this because it was just important to me that you were going to get the picture of this, because I know it's July, you're out there fishing. I want you to get this picture. We never fish in deep water. We're only fishing these deep features. We have to have a target. Now, when I showed the other day, when we showed you that three-sided bar and showed pattern trolling, there's a primary brake line under that low water. It was actually about 14 feet. And under full pool, there would be two brake lines on that bar. And the second one would have been probably around that 22 foot in that area. And so could I pattern troll both of those brake lines from one set of markers? Yeah. Now, as I described, the deeper we go, the structure tends to flatten out a little bit. It's a little bit easier to follow it around, but a structure that was that sharp, I'd pattern troll both of those brake lines. But here's what you got to know. If I was fishing under normal pool and the first primary brake line was 14 or 15 feet, I'm fishing 14, 15 feet where it breaks. And my markers are going to help me keep my lure in position. But then I see I have a secondary brake line on that same structure, a deeper brake line, at 22 feet. Where I just showed you how it's breaking 22 feet into the channel. Now I'm going to make another pass, but this pass is going to be at 22 feet. Keep in mind, I have to be on that feature. My fish are moving on the feature. I have to have my lure on the feature. So we're not only fishing structure, my friends. We're fishing structure, breaks, and brake lines. We're fishing structure as our guide to where the fish are going to be, but we're going to pinpoint those fish. And this is the critical thing. We're going to pinpoint those fish on a break or a brake line that's either on or connected to, in some way, that structure. Structure, breaks, and brake lines. There's a reason we talk about all three things. A lot of the guys today I say, and I shouldn't always pigeonhole these guys as bass guys because I'm a bass guy. But so many of the bass fishermen today, they're getting the idea now, I have to fish structure. So they go out and they fish the structure, but they cast the shallowest sections of the structure and pretty much pull up and then go to the next spot. So many of them do that. Again, influenced by spawning fish and what we did, where we had our success during the spawn. But when you're fishing deep structure, and it's two reasons I'm going to say this, so important. The only time you're ever going to run into the school of fish, I'm talking about where there's 300 or 400 bass up there on that structure. It's going to be in deep water. It's not going to be up behind this dock. It's not where they're going to be. I can pretty much guarantee you've never seen a school of big bass or a school of big walleye up under somebody's dock. It doesn't happen. When you run into the school of fish, it's downstairs. Those fish are in deep water. If what you want to do is what I want to do, which is run into the school of fish, I want to catch 10 or 15 or 20 or 30, and I want to do it in a short period of time, in 20 minutes. That's called having fun. That's called running into the school of fish. And if you desire to locate and catch the school of fish, whether you release every one of them or whether you take a few home for dinner, I already told you about that. I don't care which it is, as long as you're legal. But if your desire is to be able to locate and catch the school of fish, it's going to be in deep water. Trust me, it's going to be in deep water. I've been doing this for 45 years. It's going to be in deep water. Now, if you heard everything I said today, when fish are in deep water, they're following bottom features. So A, your lure must be on the bottom if you want to catch them, the school of fish in deep water. And B, where are we going to catch them? We're going to catch them at the breaks and or the break lines that are on or connected to that structure. Because when fish move on structure, they pause and eventually stop at a break or a break line. So I hope this kind of cleared things up for you. Understand that structure is our guide, but the breaks and the break lines are where we're going to pinpoint the fish. This is where we're going to actually run into the fish and actually catch them. So when you go out there, let's keep everything in your mind now. If we're trolling in the shallows, we're contour trolling, checking all of the water, but deeper than 8 to 10 feet. When we're pattern trolling or when we're following a deep break line, whether it be with no boat trolling line at 20, 22, 25 feet, sort of what I was showing the other day, or whether you're fishing with wire at 47 feet, you have to be fishing a feature, a break line on the troll. And if it's just one spot we're fishing, we'd be casting. And we're going to talk about that later. But when we're talking about trolling in all of the different situations where trolling is called for, 8 to 10 feet, we're checking all of the water. 8 to 10 feet and deeper, we're checking deep features only. With that being said, I appreciate you being with me today. I hope it cleared it up for you just a little bit. And we're going to sort of resume our conversation the next time we get a chance to talk on not only some more trolling techniques that we're going to talk about, but also we're going to be talking about casting in detail. And not just casting the shallows, but casting deep structure. So until the next time, I appreciate you being with me today. I hope you got a little something out of it. And I want you to like us on Facebook if you would. And be sure to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done it. There's a little red button down here. Hit that rascal and subscribe, and we appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you the next time.